Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, both on the floor but also online. I can see there are many of you here physically. I'm sure that you are also in great numbers online. We have seen that this session on the REPowerEU is a very popular one. We have had more than 1,000 registrations to participate in this session. Well, this is obviously hardly a surprise in the given political context, but also the high energy prices that we are seeing in the last year. Our ambition today is to provide an overview of the REPowerEU plan on the one side, and then we also will have included in the presentation some of the measures that have been taken lately as part of this plan. Just to provide and present you the speakers today, we will start with our Commissioner Kadri Simpson, who unfortunately, due to other commitments, could not be here present. However, we will see a recorded message from her to open this session. This will be followed by our Deputy Director General, Mr. Matthew Baldwin at DG Energy, who will provide an overview of the plan, and that presentation will be followed by Director Katarina Sikov-Magni from DG Energy. We will also have descriptions of or presentation on the impact when it comes to the EU, and we are very proud to have two external speakers also with us, Tim Gould from the International Energy Agency, as well as Mr. Dan Laird, Deputy Mayor from Paris. So without further ado, in case you do have questions, I'm hoping that you already know how Slido works. There will be a dedicated question and answer session at the end of our more or less 1 hour presentation stream. And there we will see what kind of questions you are raising through Slido. That's where we are going to pick the interesting ones out. Well, just before we hear the Commissioner's video message, we would like to warm up a bit, and if you can open your Slido, please. The first question that we would like to see from you is that if you are to associate REPowerEU with a word, what would that word be? We will see that on the screen soon. And then while you are thinking about this magic word, I would like to ask then, this is how you can then connect to Slido. And then while you're entering your answers and your hints at words, then I would like to invite you to listen to Commissioner Kadri Simpson's video message for this policy session.
Good morning, everybody. It is a pleasure to speak with you also today, especially at the kickoff of such an important session. These are extraordinary times when it comes to energy. An energy crisis, one unlike anything we have seen for decades. High energy prices, market volatility, and cuts in gas supplies from Russia. Energy is being used as a political and economic weapon. Since the start of Russia's war in Ukraine, 13 member states have seen cuts to their gas supplies. We cannot allow the energy crisis to threaten our energy security, our independence, and our climate goals. Our response is REPowerEU. This is our strategy to cut our dependency on Russian fossil fuels in 3 ways: saving, diversifying, and decarbonizing. That means boosting our savings and energy efficiency measures to make sure we can keep our homes and places of work warm this winter. We have agreed on the Save Gas for a Safe Winter package. To diversify, we set up a new EU energy platform to pool demand across the EU and negotiate jointly with international suppliers. And it's working. From January to July, non-Russian gas supplies increased by 24%. Share of Russian gas has decreased from 45 to 13. Progress is a far cry from where we were a year ago. Finally, On decarbonizing, we are boosting our efforts on renewables beyond the ambitions we had before. That includes doubling our target of renewable hydrogen by 2030. On 14th of September, the Commission adopted additional measures to address the very high electricity prices. Right now, we are working on further crisis measures to help our citizens and companies. Above all, unity and solidarity in our approach will mean success. Together, we will build a greener and more resilient EU energy system. Thank you, and enjoy the session.
Thank you very much. So let's see, what are the words that REPowerEU makes you think about? Let's see the result of the Slido. I already saw a few words. So change, security, resilience, security, but we also have independence, hydrogen, opportunity, autonomy, transition.
How many times are you allowed to vote?
I think you're allowed to vote once. Okay, renewables is coming up. Yes, what I see, okay, collaboration joins in. That's definitely a positive. Resilience seems to be one of the main words, security, change, which is probably understandable in the current situation. One of the objectives is indeed to make the energy system and Europe more resilient to any change or any crisis. But we do have ambition, very good, infrastructure. These are all efficiency elements. Okay. All right, we can keep it up for a while. I think there is a plethora of words, but all of them are valid in any case, and they seem to be converging around resilience, security, change, also renewables in terms of diversification, etc. So with that, let's see whether these words would change following this session when you hear all the presentations. So without spending too much time on that, I would like to welcome Mr. Matthew Baldwin, so Deputy Director General at DG Energy. The REPowerEU plan was adopted in May, and since then there have been several additional measures or measures under the REPowerEU that have been adopted by the Commission in order to reduce our dependency on, in general, Russian fossil fuels, but in particular in gas when it comes to the extreme short term. So I would like to ask now Matthew to the floor and give us a presentation, an overview on the REPowerEU plan.
Thank you very much indeed, Monica. Hello, everybody. Great to see such strong interest in what we're trying to achieve here. You're really welcome today. And I think we're going to have an important discussion about REPowerEU. And now the clicker's disappeared again. We have an amazing disappearing clicker. Could I have the next slide, please? Oh, it's here. Sorry. As if by magic. So in a nutshell, here is the REPowerEU on one slide. And you just heard Commissioner Simpson set out what we're about. And I'd just like to underline what she said, because REPowerEU is trying to meet a number of different challenges. It is, of course, a security of supply challenge. Our energy independence is under threat, under challenge. It's a price crisis. Both in the extent of the prices we're now facing in energy, particularly in gas, but not just, of course, in gas, and in the volatility of those prices. And last but not least, we remain with the existential challenge of climate change, and we cannot and we must not let that drop. So can we pull all of these together in one initiative we call REPowerEU? We believe so. In the first instance, as you've heard from the Commissioner, it's about ensuring we are prepared for the worst in terms of gas supplies from Russia. But secondly, it's about forging new partnerships or deepening existing partnerships around the world to secure more reliable supplies of energy. We're going to get rid of the Russian gas. We're going to need gas from other sources. If you look at all the numbers we put out on the table in Fit for 55, in the REPowerEU, it's just not going to be Russian gas anymore. That's the brutal and blunt message we're trying to get across. And last but not least, it's about accelerating the clean energy transition by implementing the proposals of the European Green Deal, the famous Fit for 55 package, as quickly as possible, rolling out new initiatives for renewables, becoming more energy efficient and to save energy. And if you see on this slide some of the headline numbers, we stepped up the target for renewable energy from 40 to 45%. We stepped up the target for energy savings from 9 to 13%. You'll hear later from Julien about the finance that underlines these changes. We are putting our collective money where our mouth is in respect of this. And then on the left there, you will see some of the detailed aspects. You've already heard from the Commissioner how much we've done in terms of changing our sources of gas this year. And we'll say, I'm not going to say more about it, but a very important thing, increasing biomethane production. That is a crucial aspect. Rooftop solar, heating pumps. All of these different things need to come together in one glorious whole. I was going to say next slide, please, but it's in my hands. I want to illustrate two particular intervention measures under the REPowerEU. The first thing I want to talk about is the EU Energy Platform, which with Monica we've been working on now since May. It's sometimes challenging to get what I call a top-down initiative, and we've got a mandate given to us by the European Council, so no pressure. And the idea here is that the Commission and the Member States will work together to set up what we call this EU Energy Platform with a new task force. We're running out of DG ENA. And again, you heard a bit from the Commissioner. We want to pool our demand for gas across the EU. We want to do that in the future to prepare, to arrange, and in the future to negotiate common purchase of gas on a voluntary basis. Of course, LNG supplies being to the forefront of that. And in the future of hydrogen. If you like, we're looking to purchase gas and we're looking to invest in those future hydrogen arrangements with international suppliers. We want to coordinate and facilitate the best use of our existing infrastructure. That's really important if we're going to make sure the gas gets to where it needs to go. And then last but not least, if we're going to facilitate and enable this joint purchasing through aggregation or pooling of demand, we need to do a big outreach to third countries in order to secure both in the short and in the longer term the necessary gas supplies at the same time as we distance ourselves rapidly from Russian gas. We've set up 5 regional groups of member states, and we are looking at how we can use those in the most effective way. Secondly, hydrogen, I touched on that, and very much in line with what else we're saying in REPower. Let me say a word about what the overall goal is, because it's such an important thing. I saw hydrogen popping up as one of the key words. By the way, there was a lot of cheating, I noticed. I saw people using 3 words. Really unacceptable. Our objective on hydrogen is very ambitious. We want to increase production of domestic renewable hydrogen to 10 million tons and import 10 million tons, all by 2030. Just to illustrate, again, against our central challenge of getting out from Russian gas, this would allow us to replace about 30 billion cubic meters of imported gas, about 5 billion cubic meters of imported oil, and 156 kilotons of coking coal imports. If we can just do that on hydrogen, huge potential benefits. Our work is focused on building partnerships with non-EU countries, with suppliers, this is on the import side, to diversify our energy supplies and build these partnerships in the longer term. And I think the message I want to really pass to you today is it underlines our commitment to this global, green and just energy transition, focusing, of course, back home on energy savings, on energy efficiency, to reduce the pressure on prices, boosting renewables and hydrogen, identifying major hydrogen corridors in the future in the Mediterranean, in the North Sea. And we're looking, as we speak, at a number of memoranda of understanding to develop those partnerships, particularly in the Mediterranean basin. But not just that, based on our existing external energy strategy, we want to work with Ukraine, with Moldova, the Western Balkans, the Eastern Partnership countries. It gives us a huge opportunity, indeed, to support Ukraine, to ensure the security of supply and a well-functioning energy sector in Ukraine, and paving the way for the green reconstruction, which that country is so passionate about. And last but not least, just to show this issue keeps moving up, President von der Leyen, in her State of the European Union speech, announced that we're working to establish a hydrogen bank with the aim of facilitating the uptake of renewable hydrogen and helping create this functioning market. So, just quickly to look at this fast-moving year, which is why one of us in energy have bags under our eyes and more lines in our faces than at the start of the year. It's often thought that we begin this crisis with the invasion of Ukraine, the event that changed everything in February of this year. But in fact, as early as the 13th of October, we came forward with a communication to tackle the already gyrating prices. We came forward with an energy price toolbox and the related Energy Council conclusions in October. After the invasion, the heads of state moved rapidly to the Versailles Declaration in March. We had further debate and discussion in March, May, and in June in the European Council. Each time I turned around, there was another discussion going on in the European Council about energy. We came forward with REPower in March and the plan in May, setting out with the communication on how to save energy, with a strategy for solar, actions on permitting to try to speed up the permitting processes across the European Union for renewables, a communication on short-term energy market interventions, and indeed looking forward to long-term improvements to our electricity market design. And last but not least, this strange new beast that Monica and I are running called the EU Energy Platform. We've had to adjust our thinking on state aids, both in March and in July, so we've come with a new temporary framework. We've come with new measures on storage, on gas storage. This has been a remarkable success story. We set targets of 80% storage fillage by November this year with an informal political target of 85%. We're already ahead of that target and roaring on to the target we set for next year of 90%. This will be crucial if we're to get through this winter and, of course, the winter that comes after that. As part of the Safe Gas for a Save Winter package, we came forward with a regulation for coordinated demand reduction. This was proposed on the 25th of July and went through the Council on the 5th of August. Rocket speed. We've had regular exchanges with member states in 1,000 different fora, regular information supplied to the European Parliament, particularly to the EAT committee, and we've been negotiating these different memorandums of understanding with Azerbaijan, with Israel and Egypt. We've had a joint presidential statement with the Americans. You might think that will be it, but we came back in the autumn, in late August in fact, and more has flowed. Just 2 weeks ago, we proposed an emergency intervention in energy markets to tackle the dramatic rise, particularly in electricity prices. So we've proposed exceptional electricity demand reduction measures, which will help reduce the cost of electricity for consumers, and measures to redistribute the growing surplus being generated by the energy sector in terms of trying to get some of those revenues to final consumers. So, again, always begins with the reduction of demand, as we did with gas in July. First, an obligation to reduce electricity consumption by at least 5% during selected peak price hours. Secondly, that member states should aim to reduce their overall electricity demand by at least 10% by the 31st of March 2023. And of course, building energy efficiency into those overall climate commitments. Secondly, we propose a temporary revenue cap on this horrific new word, inframarginal electricity producers, meaning those who have set their prices at the gas standard price, such as the renewables or the nuclear producers, and are thereby, through no fault of their own, making exceptional revenues. And we've set an inframarginal revenue cap at 180 euros per megawatt hour, which would more than enable producers to cover their investment and their operating costs without indeed impairing investment in new capacity. And revenues above this cap can be collected by member state governments and used to help energy consumers deal with the new high costs of energy. And then last but not least, we proposed a temporary solidarity contribution on excess profits generated from activities in the fossil sector, in oil and gas and coal and refinery sectors, which were not covered by the inframarginal cap. And again, the revenues would be collected by member states and directed to energy consumers, the vulnerable households, the hard-hit companies, the energy-intensive industries. So I've spoken too long. I've given you too much unabsorbable detail, but you're going to hear more unpacked through the course of this panel. The work does not stop here. We will run off after this back to our building on the other side of Schumann to consider the next steps which are coming. The message is Europe must be ready for the worst that is coming. Europe will be ready to face these challenges, and we will not give up on tackling all the different challenges we face. Climate change, as well as dealing with these ongoing crises in the gas and electricity sectors. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Matthew, for this presentation. So there is a new word that we would expect to appear under the REPowerEU, inframarginal, exactly. So I'm just waiting until that appears. The timeline also somehow reminds me of not even a marathon, but a sustained sprint when it comes to the measures that come out of the REPowerEU. But I would have a question. So some voices say that the REPowerEU shows that the European Green Deal is off the rails. So do you have a view on that?
Well, absolutely. I mean, we can't allow that view to get out there. It's so fundamental that we tackle our multiple challenges at the same time. As I go around with you, Monica, doing this new energy platform, a lot of people saying, oh, so you're no longer interested in the Green Deal? It's all about getting gas now? And again, I said it, I think, in my remarks. I want to underline it again now. We're not getting out of gas. We've always known we need gas as a transition fuel in our pipes, pretty much all the way up through 2050. Yes, a declining amount of gas in line with all the studies and the number crunching that we've done. But if you look at the numbers, we've got to replace a huge amount of gas in the short term. Russia has shown itself to be an unreliable supplier. On a daily, weekly basis, the tap is turned. We've got to get out of that gas. And I urge all of us to think about this as an opportunity, actually, to bring in new sources of gas, to establish these new partnerships, bringing in hydrogen, bringing in renewables for the future. So it's an opportunity, actually, to develop the green transition. And the biggest savings we will make, the biggest way to get out of Russian gas is indeed through renewables, through energy savings, through looking at these new ideas such as hydrogen and biomethane. So it's absolutely not a dumping of the Green Deal. It's an underlining of the Green Deal and trying to move it forward as quickly as we can. Thanks.
Thank you, Matthew. And now with that, we will open up a bit the dimension and our view on things. Our next speaker will be presenting us a bit and helping us better understand the impact of the Russian invasion on Ukraine on energy markets, not only in the EU, but more generally in a global context. So I would like to ask Mr. Timo Gould, Chief Economist at the International Energy Agency. Please take the floor.
Well, thank you very much, Monica, and it's a great privilege to be here and say some words from the International Energy Agency on the broader context for our discussion today around REPowerEU. So how has this energy crisis, which we're calling the world's first global energy crisis, how has that affected markets, policymakers, people, also beyond Europe? But before getting into that, I would just like to say that all the way through this very dense timeline that Matthew has just presented, we have had the privilege to work very closely with colleagues across the European Commission. And I'd like to commend the extraordinary work that's been done by the Commission in this area. As was said, there's no room for complacency, but there's been an awful lot done since the Russian invasion in February. And indeed, as was said, we had some warning signs, some strains in markets even before then. And within a week of the invasion, we came out with our own thoughts on the measures that should be considered by policymakers, a so-called 10-point plan for reducing Europe's reliance on Russian gas. And there's an extraordinarily strong alignment between the measures that we spoke about there and the things that we've discussed today and the things that are in REPowerEU. But this has been a real shock for markets. If you look at Europe in 2021, 1/4 of the primary energy that was consumed in the European Union came in one way or another from Russia. So disruption of those flows is naturally going to have an extraordinary impact on Europe, and those reverberations in a closely interconnected international energy market are also, were always going to be profound. If we consider gas, it's been mentioned already that Europe has increased its call on non-Russian sources alongside the energy-saving measures and the other things that have been done internally. Extraordinarily strong impact on LNG markets. So if you look at compare the first 8 months of this year with the similar period in 2021, Europe has increased its LNG imports by 2/3. So it's an extra 45 billion cubic meters for the period January to August. And naturally enough, what Europe has taken, something else has to balance in international markets, and the balancing item there has been Asian LNG demand. To an extent, this has been eased by lower Chinese consumption, lower Chinese import demand because of a slower economy and COVID-related lockdowns. But you've also had this competitive element for the available cargoes. Europe has taken many of those, and so for the first time since 2015, LNG imports into Asia this year are likely to be down. So we have had those connections with other parts of the world that I think are incredibly important. When it comes to oil, we have seen some reshuffling of international flows. But let's not forget that as of today, or the August numbers show that Russia is still the largest provider of crude and oil products to the European Union. Not by much, but there's still 2.7, 2.8 million barrels a day. And that will need to change, because as we all know, imports of seaborne crude from Russia will be prohibited as of the end of this year, and measures on oil products come in from February. So I think it's something for us all to watch out for in the coming months, not just for crude markets, but please watch out also for the impact on the middle distillates, so on diesel. A third point that I would like to emphasize for you is the importance of thinking about this not just in terms of an energy crisis, but in many parts of the world, this intersects with a food security crisis. And that is a very important part of the implications for many low-income countries. That is directly related to some of the curtailments we've seen of grain exports, but it's also an energy component, because energy costs, both directly in terms of the fuel that goes into agricultural machinery, but indirectly as well through natural gas going into nitrogen fertilizers. That is a big additional cost for countries around the world. So we need to be making those connections between energy and food, and also increasingly visible signs of the climate crisis as well. And another very important aspect of this is, of course, to look at what governments are doing. And we've talked about that in relation to Europe. But there is this balance also in other parts of the world between short-term emergency measures and long-term structural changes to energy production and consumption. And I mean, we're trying to keep track of all of the emergency sort of affordability support that has been mobilized by governments around the world. That's a huge sum, sort of 750 billion now and counting. A lot of that in advanced economies. We're also, in our dialogue with countries around the world, encouraging them also to think about what can be done to make those structural changes, what more can be done from a policy perspective to, in a sense, unlock the very strong economic advantages that clean energy technologies enjoy today in today's very high fuel price environment. So we push back against the idea that today's global energy crisis is going to be a setback for climate action. In our view, there's a very strong alignment now between the climate imperative, the energy security imperative, and also the economic advantages of the technologies that are going to see us through to a net zero emission system. And reinforcing that alignment, I think, is very important for us as an agency, but also for everyone thinking about the response to today's crisis. But finally, we also need to be aware that there is a risk that today's crisis may exacerbate some sort of geopolitical fractures in the energy and climate debate. And so I think there is a need to redouble efforts, I think, also in Europe, to build bridges with countries that are facing real difficulties at the moment, and to think about how they can, in a sense, buy into the vision for transformation that Europe has for its energy sector. And we've heard all sorts of reasons why that's important, and also the efforts that are being made now to build new partnerships. I would just underline quite how important that is to have a sort of positive, inclusive, open vision for how other countries can benefit from the sorts of dramatic changes that we're seeing taking place in Europe today. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for this presentation. You have mentioned long-term, short-term, and that this situation may get even worse or can be sustained or will stay with us a bit longer. So what do you think that actually this crisis is doing to the energy transition? So does it accelerate this energy transition or rather hold it back? And then I'm not thinking only about Europe, but in terms of in a global context.
So I think that is the critical question, and one that we're considering very closely in our own work. I think it's undoubtedly true that in the short term, energy security imperatives will push up emissions higher than they would have otherwise been. There is an increase in coal use. You see that in Europe. You see that in some other markets around the world. However, we firmly believe that after that short term, the measures that are needed to get through an extremely difficult period, that this will accelerate structural change. And it'll undoubtedly in Europe for all the reasons we've heard, but I think there's plenty of examples also elsewhere in the world. The Inflation Reduction Act in the United States, the GX Green Transformation Plan in Japan. I think you can see momentum also in many other markets, but we also have to be aware that many countries are facing a real crisis of indebtedness, as well as public health issues from COVID and all sorts of other things. So I think there is a need to redouble our efforts also on the climate finance side, on the technical side, to support that move towards what certainly makes sense from an affordability and environmental perspective.
Thank you. Well, that in any case tells us that we have to be careful in coming up with policy measures that reinforce this energy transition also outside of our borders. So let's focus back again a bit on the EU and the impact REPowerEU has on the European economy, and let's see what kind of investment needs and financial tools that could address this challenge. And with that, I would like to ask Julian Diller from the Chief Economist Office in DG Energy to give us a presentation.
Thank you, Monica. Yeah, good morning, everybody. And I have to convey apologies from my head of unit, the Chief Economist of DG ENA, who has been called by other urgencies just a few minutes ago. So I have the pleasure to give you our view, the view of our unit on the impact of REPowerEU, especially today on the investment needs and the economic impact of REPowerEU plan. As Matthew Baldwin presented earlier, the REPowerEU plan is a huge package, very extensive, and such a comprehensive plan also is needed to make us, as you rightly put down on the for the Slido, for that we become resilient from so many fossil fuel imports from non-reliant supporters, and we also have to stop filling Putin's war chest, because we were paying about 100 billion euros per year to Russia for fossil fuel imports. So in the next couple of minutes I will show you what the impact of REPowerEU plan have according to our modeling, especially as I said, on the investments, and I will also give you some hints where these investments could come from. So, but first of all, let's green arrow.
It could only be a green arrow, right?
There's a red. Ah, yeah, it's a red one. So let's have a look first at where we are coming from. So I brought you an overview of the fossil fuel imports from Russia. These are figures from 2020, and we see very directly that we were very reliant on Russian fuel imports. Let's just look at coal, for example. It's almost half of our coal imports were coming from Russia in 2020. But also with respect to oil products, and there, as Tim Gold pointed out, we should not only look at crude oil, but also at the refined products. But now we want to talk about REPower, and this brings us to focus on gas, but also with respect to gas, we were very reliant on Russia. REPowerEU is focusing especially on gas, since coal and oil were already under sanctions. They were part of the fifth and sixth sanctions package earlier this year. But becoming independent from Russian gas is quite demanding, since its delivery is mainly pipeline based, and the whole infrastructure in many member states of the EU was designed to receive natural gas flows from the east to the west, and also at low prices. To overcome these challenges, we came up with a REPowerEU plan and the dedicated actions which Matthew Baldwin already presented earlier. So according to our modeling of the REPowerEU action plan and the Fit for 55 package, we could achieve a reduction of natural gas or of gas imports of 310 BCM by 2030, and this is, as you see, it goes well beyond what we have imported. For example, in 2020, you see the number, it was 155. It became the famous number of gas imports from Russia. But this is good that we go for more ambitious goals, since at the same time our domestic production of natural gas is going down, and also the actions we put into the plan are quite ambitious and might be exposed to risks like the supply chain issues we have, but also the shortage of skilled laborers to implement all these actions under the REPowerEU plan. So we should aim higher, and this is what we are doing with REPowerEU. yeah. So let us have a look at the investment needs. This is back now. Ah, yeah. There are some magicians making it work for me. So the investment needs refer to all the actions you saw earlier in Matthew Baldwin's presentation, and as you can see, it sums up to 300 billion euros up until by 2030, which have to be invested, which is quite a huge amount of money, and a bulk of these investments, as you can see, go especially into the speedier ramp up of renewables like PV and wind, but also to the faster deployment of energy efficiency measures and the usage of heat pumps. But of course, we also see, as Tim Gold alluded to, we also see lifetime extensions for coal power plants, which lead to higher emissions in the short term. But this is also part of the package, part of the plan. So next slide, please. So where could all this money come from? We as a Commission proposed a recovery resilience facility as a privileged vehicle to channel the EU funds to the REPower priorities, and this would be done via the revised recovery and resilience plans of the member states, and yeah, as you can see here, there's quite a lot of money left under the RRF. It is mainly loans. You see that here there are 225 billion left in loans. So these could be used, but we also proposed the transfer or redirection of funds from other programs, other funds, towards the recovery and resilience plans of the member states to support the activities of the REPowerEU plan. So, for example, from the cohesion funds, from the agricultural funds, and we also put forward the proposal to reduce, to use 20 billion of revenues from ETS allowances from the reserve. So, but EU funding can be only complementary. It will not do the whole job on its own. So we need also the national budgets, and we also need, of course, private financing. And this is, when you look at the right of this slide, especially, or could be especially mobilized, for example, through InvestEU, which tries to crowd in private financing for among others, for energy projects. And this could also be very helpful to achieve the REPowerEU goals. So next slide, please. I think we are already coming to the conclusion. So I tried to convey that becoming independent from Russian gas by 2027 already is feasible, but of course not an easy task. And we have to, we meaning European Union, but with all the member states, we have to coordinate our activities, our investments, and then it might gonna work that we become independent from Russian gas imports by 2027. And we heard it already earlier as well that these investments shall be seen as an accelerator of the Green Deal and not as something which postpones the implementation of the Green Deal. So, of course, in the short term, we now use more coal power plants, but we have to speed up the deployment of renewables, speed up permission processes, and all this serve both becoming more resilient and achieving our net zero targets until 2050. So the Commission proposed several additional mechanisms to redistribute also windfall profits from energy companies, from fossil fuel companies, to support EU repower measures, but this is still to be seen if this will be implemented. So with this, I would like to conclude, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Julian. You touched upon one of the hottest topics is money. So there are all sorts of investments needed, but they all cost money. So one of the questions to you is that there are expectations that maybe additional EU funds would be necessary to finance the impact and the cost of this current crisis. So what is your view on that?
Yeah, I think we all understand and support the call for additional money to support especially those who suffer already from high energy prices. So I think this is heard at the European Commission, but also at the member states level. So yeah, we propose, as I presented, several funds to be used. We propose to redirect funds from existing programs, since the current multi-financial framework with almost 2,000, I always mix up billion, trillion, in English it's billion.
Economist those things up.
Yeah, and this is one of the, or this is the largest budget we came forward with, and we should probably now concentrate on the REPowerEU targets. And of course, in this context, the Commission is ready to also coordinate new funds and new, for example, the issuance of new bonds to finance the needs of the vulnerable households and the companies which came into economic imbalances. But we have to keep in mind that all this takes time. Although we have seen on the timeline which Matthew Baldwin showed, we are quite quick these days in implementing new actions. But still, putting up a new program, putting up a new fund takes time, and we need the money now, and the money has to reach those who are in need quite quickly. So we would rather suggest to focus on the existing funds and redirect them to our current challenges and targets.
Thank you. Well, let's move on a bit on the supply side. A new situation when it comes to supply and the need for diversification needs the hardware, as we like to call it, so we need infrastructure. So how the situation has changed in terms of what these needs are. And for that, I would like to ask Katarina Sikov-Magni, the director in DG Energy, to give us a short presentation. Thank you.
Many thanks, Monica. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Very pleased to be here today and to focus on infrastructure instead of all the fancy words of inframarginal and the rest. I was very glad to see infrastructure come up on Slido. I was already a bit worried that it wouldn't, and then I thought that I may have to leave, but no, thank you. Because infrastructure, in a way, it is the one that provides us with security, resilience and solidarity, all those words that we saw in Slido. Infrastructure meaning getting the, be it electricity, gas, hydrogen, heat, from where it is produced to where it is consumed, so infrastructure. And it is often the less fancy part of the developments. People want to focus on renewables, people want to focus on solar PV on the roof, etc., and infrastructure is often seen as the less interesting, but it is essential. Our policy in the EU for infrastructure is the Trans-European Networks Policy. It has an article in the EU treaty of its own, and there on the energy side we have been developing the policy since 2013, so it is already well in place, focuses on the EU infrastructure that is needed to connect member states and then bring electricity, gas, in particular where it is consumed, where it's produced to consumes. We heard the current context, the war that Putin started in Ukraine, creating a very difficult situation to many of our member states, but also more worldwide. So I'm not going to go into those details. There, the Commission's response with the REPowerEU has been rapid and strong. What we have achieved in terms of infrastructure already, if we start with gas, where the Trans-European Network Policy and the financial tools that member states have and Commission brings to the table through Connecting Your Facility has been quite impressive. So we have, if we think of gas first, because that's where the current disruption is already taking place, we heard 30 member states don't get gas from Russia anymore, and we heard this morning that Nord Stream 1 and 2 are leaking in the Baltic Sea. So things are moving, unfortunately, very fast and not in the right direction. But what we have now coming on stream in the next weeks or months, so gas connection between Poland and Lithuania, Poland, Slovakia, Baltic pipe that will bring North Sea gas via Denmark to Poland, Greece-Bulgaria connection, and also a number of LNG terminals, including Alexandroupolis in Greece. With these infrastructures in place in the next couple of days and the previous ones that have already been built, we are not at all anymore in the same situation where Europe was in 2009, if you remember, when Russia cut gas via Ukraine and half of Europe was left in the cold. There was gas at the time, but no infrastructure. Now we lack also part of the gas that we need, but our infrastructure is already sufficiently or relatively resilient so that we can bring gas then, if full disruption happens, from west to east. We are better placed. We are not perfectly placed, of course, yet. And what we looked at together with the gas infrastructure transmission system operators was also what kind of infrastructure bottlenecks there would still remain and which of those can be then rapidly built, meaning basically in the next year or two, so that we are ready to replace the Russian gas with other sources of gas. If I then move to electricity, where we also heard that renewables will be the best tool, in addition to energy efficiency, of course, to phase out the use of gas and coal as well, and where the infrastructure policy is also making it possible to share resources in the EU. We have the biggest interconnected grid in the whole world in electricity, and it is the most reliable one as well. So something we have achieved to build in Europe and will be very important also in the coming winter. The TENI regulation, so the regulation governing the Trans-European Energy Networks, was recently renewed. It was modernized to bring into the new elements that were lacking until then. And here I'm particularly thinking of the huge offshore renewable potential that we have, where all the wind, ocean energy, hydrogen and storage need, of course, to be brought to where it is consumed. Nobody lives in the sea, or nobody has their factories or plants in the sea. So that requires infrastructure again. Member States, together with the Commission, are very keen to develop this huge potential in the sea, also where the wind is much more stable than on the land, meaning that it is much more reliable, much less variable than. 2 summits have been organized in the past months, where Commission President and Commissioner Simpson have been present, one in the North Sea and then the second one in the Baltic Sea. And we are now working together with member states to look into Atlantic, Mediterranean, and perhaps also Black Sea in the very short term. So tools are there, interest is there, and the potential is there. The other new element that we brought into the Trans-European networks is hydrogen, where we see a lot of interest, and especially the so-called industrial valleys where the production and consumption would be close to each other, already taking off. But we need to plan for the next stage, where hydrogen can then be transported from one part of the EU to other parts of the EU. The potential for renewable hydrogen, the 10 plus 10 million tons that Matthew referred to, is then to be produced and consumed, and we do need infrastructure for that as well. So the Trans-European networks and the regulatory framework has been prepared to enable this also to happen in hydrogen. Last word here, I think one of the biggest challenges still in infrastructure is not money. I mean, money will come if there are good projects. It's permitting. And we have made a couple of proposals on the TEN-E side on the one hand, but also on the renewables side, so as to make permitting faster, whilst, of course, at the same time keeping the high quality we have for our environment respected, and making sure that infrastructure also takes into account the needs there. So we have proposed most recently a regulation looking at renewable and the grids that come with on permitting, and also proposed the concept of overriding public interest for renewables, and asked member states to develop so-called go-to areas where it would be procedurally more rapid and easier to build renewables and the connecting grids. These are still in the interinstitutional negotiations between the Council and the European Parliament, and we hope to come to a conclusion very rapidly, because we do need the renewables and we do need the grids much, much faster than we perhaps thought a couple of years ago. The energy transition requires that very fast, but now the current situation with the Russian war in Ukraine requires even speeding up from that point of view. So that's where we are with infrastructure, and look forward to the question and answers. Thank you, Monica.
Thank you very much. I have a question for everyone, so you cannot escape it. So you mentioned during your presentation that we have to accelerate, in view of the REPowerEU objectives, the implementation of infrastructure, be it renewables, deployment, electricity infrastructure, and to a certain extent also gas infrastructure. You also made a reference to that money is usually not the problem. So what are the main barriers that you see when it comes to these investments?
What I would say first, I referred to already to permitting. Permitting being one of the challenges for any infrastructure, be it grid or be it renewable investment. I referred to the legislation that we have proposed and which is also in place already for the trans-European networks. But here I think it is very much a question of implementation. So member states implementing the requirements, and not only implementing them in terms of national legislation, but also by putting enough resources into the permitting authorities so that they can then analyze the requests and provide the permits on a timely manner. So I think that is the main challenge there. The tools are there. We need the right resources, and we need member states to work with us in implementing these. And before giving you back the floor, I would also like to say that there is often, when it comes to infrastructure, the so-called NIMBY phenomenon, so not in my backyard. And if everybody thinks the same, I think there is no space left anywhere. So we really need to start thinking of that we need these investments, we need the renewables, we need the grid. Otherwise, we will not get decarbonization, and otherwise, in this war situation, Putin will continue having an upper hand. Thanks.
Thank you.
Could I just add an aside to what Katarina said, that there's now on Twitter a movement called YIMBY. Yes, in my backyard. And maybe this is a good segue to what Dan's going to talk about in terms of cities, because cities are often the first to embrace these things and say, yeah, we want to do this stuff, bring it on. So yeah, that's what we need to encourage.
Thank you. And actually, that will be a very nice way of calling our next speaker. Implementation needs to be done on the ground. So we need to get local when it comes to implementation. We can speak about many things at the EU level, but after all, it will depend on what is done at the local level. So Mr. Dan Laird, Deputy Mayor of Paris, he's in charge of the ecological transition, and we would like to then hear what he has to say in terms of implementation and what kind of plans you have in Paris.
Good morning, everybody. First of all, I would like to thank the European Commission and for organizing this event, in particular this session, where we can share with you the Paris strategy for energy transition and our energy saving plan. Today, our topic is a change of energy model, the way to strongly improve it and to strengthen the energy sovereignty of our territories in the context of a REPowerEU plan. As Matthew Baldwin said, I would like to recall that energy crisis started long before the 24th of February. We've known for years that our energy model based on fossils is anything but sustainable. We've all been to climate summits hoping for major shifts in our global energy consumption, but one has to admit that we are still collectively fossil fuel dependent. Obviously, the invasion of Ukraine by Russia profoundly changed the way we address energy issues. It is not only for states or local governments. People throughout Europe have changed their perception. We cannot go on doing as before. Every measure needs to be taken to reduce our consumption and dependence to fossil fuels. The need for energy savings and ecological transition is obvious. Faced with the risk of shortage, a national and European effort of saving energies at all levels must be implemented. The city of Paris is doing its part through an energy saving plan presented by the mayor, Anne Hidalgo, the last 13th of September. Before developing the details of this plan, I need to explain the philosophy and the ambitions of the city of Paris. The Parisian energy saving plan is based on three axes. First, the immediate and long-term reduction of the territory's energy consumption. Second, the reinforcement of aid mechanisms to protect and support the most vulnerable. Third, accelerating the energy transition and renewable energies in Paris and beyond. These three pillars allows us to have a current and global approach for the implementation of a fair ecological transition in the long term. I would like to insist the fight against energy insecurity with a special attention for vulnerable households is one of our first priorities. Last winter, before energy prices explosion, more than 77,000 Parisian households suffered energy poverty. We know this figure might skyrocket in the next few months. We voted an action plan against energy and security last November, and we hope to improve our social energy policy as soon as possible. The City of Paris has presented its measures for tackling the energy crisis, including lowering temperatures in all public buildings, reducing the intensity of lighting, of public lighting, and combating fuel poverty. Our global objective is to reduce by 10% our energy consumption as soon as possible. To give you some details about the energy, the Parisian administration consumes directly about 710 gigawatt hours per year for buildings and nearly 100 gigawatt per hours for public lighting. It means about 2% of the Paris energy consumption. The others, 98%, depends on tertiary, private, and other public buildings. In the Paris, all the territorial stakeholders consume about 30,000 gigawatt hours per year without mobility consumption. The City of Paris energy saving plans aims to reduce our energy consumption by 60 gigawatt hours, reducing the energy consumption of the City of Paris by around 10% would save around 10 million euros according to current prices. In Paris, the municipality operates directly about 3,000 municipal buildings, 600 elementary schools, and 40 swimming pools, 8 municipal museums, and several theaters. During the day, the temperature in these public buildings will be reduced from 19 to 18 degrees Celsius. It represents about 33% of the municipal energy saving plan. In the mornings, there will be a 30-minute delay before the temperature is turned back on. This reduction will not affect elder people's homes or other buildings such as nurseries. Swimming pools will also be heated by 1 degree less. They will be reduced to 26 degrees in the water and 25 in the air. It represents about 4% of the municipal energy saving plan. In order to apply this action in a reasoned and appropriate manner, we are going to create a network of energy efficiency reference with agents already in place. The heating of the administrative building will be postponed until the All Saints holiday at the end of October. This decision will be adapting according to the severity of the winter. It represents about 9% of the municipal energy saving plan. In recent years, after an initial cold snap at the end of September, temperatures have generally recovered. The measure is therefore to get through this first cooling wave without turning on the heating again. This is exactly what we are seeing today. The public lighting of a municipal monument has been switched off at 10 p.m. since the 23rd of September. Public lighting is not affected to ensure the safety of Parisians. This measure concerns in particular the City Hall, the 70 borough halls, the 8 municipal museums, and several theaters. It represents about 4% of the municipal energy saving plans. At the same time, the illumination of the Eiffel Tower will end before midnight, the closing times for visit. Also, of a symbolic dimension, Paris sets an example with its emblematic monument, the Eiffel Tower. We can see that this measure, which was initially somewhat criticized, very quickly gave rise to similar announcements from the government with the Louvre Museum and the Château de Versailles, and from large business groups. Other measures resulting from the necessary consultation of Parisians will be added as soon as possible before the winter. We will also strengthen the protection of the most vulnerable by fighting against fuel poverty, by bringing together the different types of aid, and by facilitating their accessibility. Other preventive aids will be added, such as the implementation of an aid fund for small emergency work when the building cannot be renovated globally in the short term. This mobilization around energy saving must be general on the Parisian territory. It's why the municipality wants to involve all the economic actors of the territory. 96% of energy consumption in Paris don't depend directly on the consumption of municipal public services, but on all other stakeholders. With our Parisian energy saving plan, we hope to create a transformation and a new dynamic with all stakeholders in the area. The city of Paris also plans to accelerate its energy efficiency and renewable energy production programs. We are going to invest 58 million euros to multiply by 3 the retrofitting of private housing. We are going to reduce the intensity of public lighting by 30%. We are going to accelerate the development of our urban heat grid. And on renewable energy, our target in 2030 is to achieve 10% of local production. On this point, as Mayor Anne Hidalgo said, cities and local authorities need to be supported on their action for energy transition. The EU direct support for our solar plant, for example, is part of the solution to accelerate our transition. As a conclusion, it is important to say that the city of Paris alone will not be able to face the energy transition challenge. Energy savings, efficiency, renewable energy, we do our best. But all our efforts to tackle climate change are vain if major fossil fuel companies continue to develop climate killer projects. This is why Paris, alongside with the city of New York, have announced last week that our cities are joining the lawsuit against Total Energy to force them to bring its long-term strategy in line with the Paris Agreement. We need the support of EU to ensure Paris Agreement is respected by all the stakeholders, in particular the players, by big players from the private sector. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. This energy saving plan seems very, very ambitious. My question to you would be whether there are any additional measures that you are planning, and what is the next step in terms of the implementation of the savings plan?
Les prochaines étapes, sorry, I speak in French. Les prochaines étapes qui vont être amenées à être, les prochaines mesures, pardon, complémentaires qui vont être amenées à être prises par la ville de Paris vont concerner principalement le chauffage dans les bâtiments et évidemment toutes les questions autour de l'eau chaude sanitaire, etc. Donc des mesures encore de sobriété énergétique. Et puis des mesures qui vont concerner plus largement nos bâtiments et l'accélération de la transition énergétique dont je parlais et qui appellent des investissements qui sont très importants. Nous avons déjà investi à Paris 10 milliards dans la transition écologique, dont 1 milliard sur la rénovation thermique de nos bâtiments et dont 600 millions d'euros pour l'isolation des logements sociaux, des logements publics à Paris. Nous pouvons aller plus loin, mais la ville de Paris, comme toutes les autorités locales, a besoin d'investissements de la part de l'Europe, mais évidemment aussi du gouvernement national.
Merci beaucoup. And this takes us to the Q&A session. We don't have too much time left, so I would say we look at the list of questions that have been submitted, and there is already one on hydrogen. So the question is, among the many alternatives to fossil fuels, the EU is giving particular attention and funding to hydrogen. Is it not disproportionate and a risky strategy? And actually, I would like to give the floor to Katarina first.
Thanks, a very good question indeed. I mean, hydrogen is something that we have a lot around. The challenge there is, of course, to get it from be it water or air into then hydrogen. With increasing amounts of renewables, we can produce that hydrogen in a clean way. But of course, it has to be then produced by renewables or low carbon electricity sources. So therefore, I would say that it is not a risky strategy. We need all the possible decarbonization sources, be it electrification, be it biomethane produced from waste, and all the other type of renewable and low carbon sources. And here hydrogen fits very nicely into the picture. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone would like to join in on hydrogen, or we can go to the next question? How do we make sure that Europe has a future-proof electricity transmission and distribution network to manage the increasing share of renewables? I think Katarina would be, again, the next.
Thanks. Glad to see that infrastructure is so important also in the questions. Well, for the future-proof electricity grid, we do have the policy in place, which is the Trans-European Network Policy that brings together all the players, be they the grid operators, regulators, member states, stakeholders, and others, to plan, to look at where bottlenecks are, and then to plan what needs to be done and when. So I think that is the key element there. What is, of course, underpins the grid planning is the planning of the production. So where do the new electrolyzers for hydrogen go? Where will the new renewables be, etc., etc. And that is also something that we need to reinforce, be sure that we have the data, the players together to do it. But I think the tools are there, and last there, the new distribution system operators entity, EU DSO entity, was very recently created and is also then coming to these planning discussions, given the very important role of distribution grids in the decarbonization. So I think all the elements are there. We need to work together. You can't have a grid in isolation, so need to work together, and the regional cooperation is essential there. Thanks.
Thank you. I will take the next question on clean electrification, because I think with that I can also give the floor to Tim from a technology point of view. So how can the EU drive clean electrification, a long-term solution to getting off gas? Another question, whether it's in the REPowerEU, do we need targets, or there are any other ways of pushing or incentivizing?
I mean, at least as I see it, clean electrification is really central to all transitions, including the European one. It has a number of components which need to be well sequenced and well coordinated. We've spoken already about the generation side. I completely agree on the network and storage side. I mean, that's absolutely crucial. It's not often well understood that if you look at our projections for investment that we produce at the International Energy Agency, the spending on infrastructure, electricity infrastructure, is at least as important in a transition as the spending on generation. So we have to make sure that those two go together. And then, there are targets in different end-use sectors which will, of course, push clean electrification. Targets for EVs, targets for heat pumps, and so on. Now, just as an aside on this question about clean electrification getting you off gas, one of the other things that comes through very clearly in our own analysis is that, indeed, as you move through transitions in Europe, you use less gas. That's inevitable. But your peak demand for gas may actually go up compared with today. Because until you have solutions for sort of long-duration energy storage in place, gas remains quite important, particularly, for those periods when during the winter, when other resources are not available. So please be aware that that is not a sort of linear reduction in the importance of gas. Aggregate, yes, but when you need it, you probably really need it for electricity security.
Thank you. And I think the question disappeared, but I would like to ask Dan whether there is anything planned in Paris to support energy utilities. That came up as a question.
À Paris, nous travaillons effectivement avec tous les fournisseurs d'énergie, mais nous faisons face surtout à la défaillance des fournisseurs d'énergie qui se sont engagés, et notamment pour tout ce qui concerne la fourniture d'énergie pour nos logements sociaux, nos logements publics. Nous faisons face à la défaillance d'un certain nombre de fournisseurs alternatifs aux fournisseurs EDF, etc. Donc nous sommes en train d'anticiper notamment, et nous anticipons dans le cadre aussi de la fourniture d'énergie pour nos services publics municipaux, de se prémunir des défaillances de ces fournisseurs alternatifs et de vérifier l'approvisionnement et qu'il n'y ait pas de rupture d'approvisionnement énergétique pour tous les services publics municipaux de la ville, mais nous avons des difficultés avec un certain nombre de fournisseurs d'énergie qui mettent la clé sous la porte, tout simplement, et qui laissent sur le carreau des milliers de locataires.
Merci beaucoup. And unfortunately, we are getting to the end of our session. I will be shot down if I do not conclude with some remarks and key messages. But it was a very interesting session. At least we also managed to get some time for questions. I think that the highlights are we are facing a huge challenge, and all of us can have a role in addressing these, including at the EU level, individual member states, but also the local regions, cities, as well as citizens, just ourselves, by even just contributing to certain energy savings and changing or adapting our behavior. So with that, I would like to thank our speakers. Let's give them a big applause. And I would like the organizers to finish off with some important messages for you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Monica, for facilitating a very exciting session. With this session, we are wrapping up the first thematic block of this Day 2 of the European Sustainable Energy Week 2022. And with no less than with REPowerEU, there's been a clear sense of urgency to get rid of Russian gas dependency, to boost our renewable capacity, and also to reduce our overall energy demand. We've seen already in the keywords, right? There's a sense of change and security and emergency, but also of resilience, of opportunities. So we will be back in 1 hour at 2 p.m. Brussels time for the second thematic block of the day that will be dedicated entirely in digitalization and how digitalization can transform the European energy landscape. We will be kicking off with a keynote speech and then 2 slots of 3 parallel sessions each. So thank you very much to all of you for being here. And I'll see you back in 1 hour here at the De Gasperi room for the next plenary session.